What if I told you that everything you think you know about success, happiness, and freedom is actually keeping you trapped in an invisible prison? What if the ancient philosophers discovered something thousands of years ago that could shatter every illusion you've been living under? Right now, as you're watching this, you're either about to discover the most liberating truth of your life, or you're going to keep sleepwalking through existence like 99% of the population. Look, I know that sounds dramatic, but here's the thing. Every single day, millions of people wake up feeling like something's wrong. They go through the motions, chase the same dreams everyone else is chasing, and wonder why they feel empty inside. They're living in what the ancient Greeks called the cave of shadows, and what we might recognize today as the Matrix. But here's what's crazy. The solution to breaking free isn't some modern self-help guru's invention. It's ancient wisdom that's been hiding in plain sight for over 2,000 years. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how to use it. Picture this. Around 380 BC, a Greek philosopher named Plato told a story that would predict our modern predicament with terrifying accuracy. He described prisoners chained in a cave, watching shadows on a wall, convinced that these shadows were reality itself. They'd never seen the fire casting the shadows, let alone the sun outside the cave. Now, fast forward 2,400 years. We're scrolling through social media, watching curated highlights of other people's lives, convinced this is what success looks like. We're consuming news that keeps us afraid, entertainment that keeps us distracted, and advertisements that convince us we're incomplete without the next purchase. We're the prisoners in Plato's cave, and the shadows we're watching are the Matrix. But here's where it gets interesting. Plato didn't just describe the problem. He mapped out the exact process of awakening. And when you understand this process, you realize why breaking free feels so difficult, and more importantly, why it's absolutely necessary. The first stage of awakening, according to Plato, is the most painful. It's when you start to question everything you've been told is true. Your career path, your relationships, your beliefs about money, success, and happiness. Everything starts to feel uncertain. This isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature. Doubt is the beginning of wisdom. But here's what most people don't realize about Plato's cave allegory. It's not just about intellectual awakening. It's about the complete transformation of your entire being. When the prisoner is first dragged out of the cave, the sunlight hurts his eyes. He wants to go back to the comfortable darkness of familiar illusions. This perfectly describes what happens when you start to wake up from societal programming. You begin to see how your education system was designed to create compliant workers, not independent thinkers. You realize how mainstream media manipulates your emotions to keep you engaged with their content. You understand how consumer culture has convinced you that your worth is tied to your possessions. And this seeing is initially overwhelming. Plato described the freed prisoner's journey in stages. First, he sees the fire casting the shadows. This is when you recognize that what you thought was reality is actually manufactured. Then he's dragged outside the cave entirely. This is when you begin to understand the larger systems of control. Finally, he sees the sun itself. This represents direct perception of truth, unfiltered by any intermediary. But the story doesn't end there. The freed prisoner returns to the cave to help others, and they think he's crazy. They reject his message and even become hostile toward him. This is why awakening can be lonely. When you see through illusions that others still believe in, communication becomes difficult. The key insight from Plato's allegory is that freedom is a choice that must be made repeatedly. Even after you've seen the sun, you can choose to return to the cave. Even after you understand how the matrix works, you can choose to plug back in. This is why ancient wisdom emphasizes practice over just intellectual understanding. While Plato was mapping the journey out of illusion, other ancient philosophers were developing practical tools for mental liberation. The Stoics, philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca created what might be the most powerful psychological framework ever developed for maintaining sanity in an insane world. Marcus Aurelius, who happened to be the most powerful man in the world as Roman emperor, wrote something in his private journal that should shake you to your core. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Think about that. The guy who controlled an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt believed that true power came from controlling your own thoughts, not controlling others. But here's what's revolutionary about Stoic philosophy. It's not about suppressing emotions or accepting a miserable situation. It's about understanding the difference between what you can control and what you can't. And once you truly grasp this distinction, everything changes. Let me give you a modern example. You wake up, check your phone, and see that your investment portfolio dropped 20% overnight. The matrix response is panic, stress, maybe some angry posts on social media, calling your broker, losing sleep. The Stoic response? You recognize that the market movement already happened. That's outside your control. But your response to it? That's entirely within your power. Epictetus, who was literally a slave before becoming one of history's greatest philosophers, put it this way: it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This man understood oppression in ways we can barely imagine, yet he discovered a freedom that no external force could touch. Think about Epictetus's life for a moment. He was born into slavery, had a physical disability that caused him constant pain, and lived under the absolute authority of Roman masters who could kill him on a whim. Yet he developed a philosophy of radical inner freedom that has inspired people for over 2,000 years. If he could find freedom in those circumstances, what's your excuse? The Stoics developed specific daily practices that are like antibodies against matrix programming. They practiced negative visualization, imagining losing everything they valued, not to be pessimistic, but to appreciate what they had and prepare mentally for life's inevitable changes. They kept death journals, reminding themselves daily of their mortality, not to be morbid, but to focus on what truly mattered. Here's a Stoic exercise you can try right now. Think about something that's currently stressing you out. Maybe it's a relationship conflict, a work deadline, or a financial concern. Now ask yourself, what aspect of this situation is actually within my control? You'll probably find that most of your stress is coming from trying to control things that are fundamentally outside your influence. Marcus Aurelius developed what modern psychologists would call cognitive reframing techniques. When faced with difficult people, he would remind himself, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This isn't about becoming a doormat or accepting abuse. It's about maintaining your inner equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. When you're not constantly reactive to other people's behavior, you can respond for wisdom rather than emotion. Seneca, perhaps the most practical of the Stoics, developed techniques for what he called poverty training. Once a month, he would live as if he had lost everything, eating simple food, wearing basic clothes, sleeping on the floor. This wasn't masochism. It was preparation. By regularly experiencing voluntary discomfort, he became free from the fear of losing his wealth. And paradoxically, this freedom from fear made him more effective at creating and managing wealth. The Stoic practice of morning and evening reflection is perhaps their most powerful tool for staying conscious in an unconscious world. Each morning, they would set intentions for the day, remind themselves of their core principles, and prepare mentally for challenges. Each evening, they would review their actions and thoughts, celebrating their successes and learning from their mistakes. This daily practice of self-examination prevents you from sleepwalking through life. It forces you to stay conscious of your choices and their consequences. It's like having a personal accountability system that helps you live according to your highest values rather than your lowest impulses. But if you really want to understand the matrix, you need to go even deeper. About 500 years before Plato, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama walked away from unimaginable wealth and power because he realized something profound. Even paradise can be a prison if you don't understand the nature of reality. What Buddha discovered is that our sense of self, this solid, permanent identity we think we have, is actually an illusion. And this illusion is what keeps us trapped. We spend our entire lives trying to protect, enhance, and satisfy this fictional character we think we are, never realizing that our suffering comes from this very effort. Think about it. How much of your stress, anxiety, and unhappiness comes from threats to your ego? Someone disrespects you at work, and you're angry for days. You don't get the recognition you think you deserve, and you feel bitter. Your social media post doesn't get enough likes, and you feel inadequate. All of this suffering comes from defending something that doesn't actually exist in the way you think it does. Buddha's insight was that what we call self is actually a collection of ever-changing processes, thoughts, sensations, emotions, perceptions, and mental formations. There's no permanent, unchanging essence that constitutes you. This isn't nihilism. It's liberation. When you realize that the ego you've been defending so desperately is just a mental construct, you can begin to relate to it more playfully. Buddhist meditation isn't about emptying your mind or achieving some blissful state. It's about seeing clearly. When you sit quietly and observe your thoughts without getting caught up in them, you start to notice something incredible. Thoughts arise and pass away on their own. You don't control them, and you don't need to identify with them. This practice of mindful observation is like learning to see the code of the matrix. You start to notice the patterns, how advertising manipulates your desires, how social conditioning shapes your beliefs, how fear-based messaging keeps you compliant. But instead of getting angry about it, you simply see it for what it is, and that seeing alone begins to free you. Here's a simple Buddhist exercise you can try. For the next 5 minutes, just sit and observe your breath. Don't try to control it or change it. Just watch it. Notice how thoughts arise and try to pull your attention away from the breath. When this happens, gently return your attention to breathing. What you're practicing is the fundamental skill of awakening, the ability to observe your mental processes without being controlled by them. But Buddhism goes much deeper than just personal liberation. Buddha taught that all beings are interconnected, and that individual awakening naturally leads to compassion for others. This is because when you see through the illusion of a separate self, you realize that the boundaries between self and other are also constructs. The Buddhist concept of dependent origination reveals that nothing exists independently. Everything arises in relationship to everything else. Your thoughts arise based on your experiences, which arise based on your interactions with others, which arise based on social conditions, which arise based on historical factors, and so on. There's no independent, self-existing entity anywhere in this web of relationships. This understanding naturally dissolves blame and judgment. When you realize that everyone's behavior arises from causes and conditions beyond their ultimate control, you develop compassion even for those who seem to be causing harm. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or failing to set boundaries. It means responding to unskillful behavior with wisdom rather than reactivity. The Buddhist practice of loving kindness meditation systematically extends goodwill to yourself, loved ones, neutral people, difficult people, and eventually, all beings. This isn't just a nice sentiment. It's a recognition that your well-being and the well-being of others are fundamentally interconnected. Buddhism also offers profound insights into the nature of desire and satisfaction. The Buddha identified craving as the root cause of suffering, not desire itself, but the compulsive grasping for things to be different than they are. Modern consumer culture is essentially organized around stimulating and exploiting this craving. Every advertisement is designed to make you feel incomplete without their product. Every social media platform is engineered to trigger your craving for validation, connection, or status. The entire economic system depends on keeping you in a constant state of wanting more. Buddhism offers a radical alternative, the possibility of contentment with what is. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing ambition. It means distinguishing between healthy aspiration and neurotic craving. When you're not driven by compulsive desires, you can pursue goals more effectively because you're not clouded by desperation. While Western philosophy was developing systems for understanding reality, ancient Chinese philosophers were discovering something equally profound, the power of Wu Wei, or effortless action. Taoism teaches that there's a natural flow to life, and when we align ourselves with this flow instead of fighting against it, we become incredibly powerful. Lao Tzu, the legendary founder of Taoism, wrote something that perfectly describes how to navigate the matrix. The sage does not attempt anything very big, and thus achieves greatness. In a world that's constantly telling you to hustle harder, work longer, accumulate more, this ancient wisdom suggests a radically different approach. Consider water. It's soft, yielding, seemingly weak. Yet it carves through solid rock, fills any container, and always finds the path of least resistance. The Taoist approach to breaking free from the matrix isn't about rebellion or force. It's about becoming like water. In practical terms, this means stopping the constant struggle against reality. Instead of fighting traffic, you leave earlier or find alternate routes. Instead of forcing conversations, you listen deeply and speak only when it adds value. Instead of trying to control outcomes, you focus on your process and let results emerge naturally. This doesn't mean being passive or accepting injustice. It means choosing your battles wisely and using the minimum amount of force necessary to create the maximum positive impact. Gandhi understood this principle when he said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." He didn't try to overthrow the British Empire through violence. He became so aligned with truth and nonviolence that his mere presence began to transform everything around him. The Taoist concept of yin and yang reveals that apparent opposites are actually complementary aspects of a single reality. Light defines darkness, strength defines weakness, action defines rest. Modern culture tends to value only one side of these polarities, always light, always strong, always active, which creates imbalance and exhaustion. Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting in harmony with natural patterns. Sometimes this looks like intense effort, sometimes like complete stillness. A skilled martial artist embodies Wu Wei by using an opponent's force against them rather than meeting force with force. A wise leader practices Wu Wei by creating conditions where people naturally want to cooperate rather than forcing compliance through threats. Here's how you can begin practicing Wu Wei in daily life. Start paying attention to your body's natural rhythms. When do you feel most creative? When do you need rest? What foods make you feel energized versus sluggish? Instead of forcing yourself to fit arbitrary schedules, begin aligning your activities with your natural energy patterns. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the uncarved block, the state of natural simplicity before social conditioning shapes us into artificial forms. Children naturally embody this quality. They're spontaneous, present, curious, and authentic. Socialization gradually teaches us to suppress these qualities in favor of appropriate behavior. Returning to the uncarved block doesn't mean becoming childish. It means reclaiming the childlike qualities that serve awakening while maintaining adult wisdom and responsibility. It means learning to trust your natural instincts again after years of being told to ignore them. Zhuangzi, the second great Taoist philosopher, told a story about a butcher who could carve an entire ox without ever dulling his knife. His secret was finding the natural joints and spaces within the animal structure. He didn't force his way through bone and muscle. He followed the path that was already there. This story illustrates the Taoist approach to any complex situation. Instead of trying to force your way through obstacles, you look for the natural openings and opportunities. Instead of swimming against the current, you find ways to use the current's power to reach your destination. Taoism also emphasizes the power of emptiness and space. A bowl is useful not because of the clay it's made from, but because of the empty space that can hold things. A room is valuable not because of its walls, but because of the space they create. Similarly, your power comes not from constantly filling your life with activities and possessions, but from creating space for what truly matters. In our overstimulated, hyperconnected world, the Taoist emphasis on emptiness and silence is revolutionary. We're afraid of quiet moments because they force us to confront ourselves without distractions. But these quiet moments are where wisdom emerges and creativity is born. Hidden within the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and Greece was perhaps the most powerful understanding of how reality actually works. The Hermetic tradition, attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, taught that the universe operates according to precise principles. And when you understand these principles, you can work with them instead of against them. The most famous Hermetic principle is as above, so below. As within, so without. This isn't mystical nonsense. It's a recognition that the patterns you see in your external world are reflections of your internal state. Your relationships mirror your relationship with yourself. Your financial situation reflects your beliefs about abundance and scarcity. Your health manifests your mental and emotional patterns. This principle reveals why trying to change your external circumstances without changing your internal state is like trying to improve your reflection by cleaning the mirror. You might get temporary results, but the fundamental patterns remain unchanged. The matrix operates by keeping you focused externally, always looking for the next thing, person, or experience that will finally make you happy. The Hermetic approach is to recognize that the kingdom of heaven is within you, and as you transform internally, your external world begins to shift automatically. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Hermetic tradition also taught specific techniques for internal transformation. They understood that most people are not one unified consciousness, but rather a collection of different sub-personalities, each with its own desires, fears, and agendas. Modern psychology has rediscovered this truth in concepts like internal family systems therapy. You have a part of you that wants to be successful, another part that fears failure, a part that craves connection, and another part that fears intimacy. Most people are unconsciously driven by whichever part is loudest at any given moment. The Hermetic practice of self-observation allows you to become the witness of these different aspects of yourself. Instead of being unconsciously driven by your programming, you become the conscious director of your own psychological orchestra. Here's a Hermetic exercise. Throughout the day, notice which sub-personality is driving your behavior. Are you acting from your ambitious self, your fearful self, your loving self, or your rebellious self? Simply observing these different aspects without judgment begins to give you choice in how you respond to situations. The Hermetic tradition also taught the principle of mentalism, the idea that everything is mental in nature. This doesn't mean that physical reality doesn't exist, but rather that consciousness is the fundamental substrate from which all experiences arise. Your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs literally shape your reality. This principle has been validated by modern quantum physics, which reveals that the observer affects the observed. But you don't need to understand quantum mechanics to apply this principle. Simply pay attention to how your mental state influences your experiences. When you're in a negative mental state, you notice more problems, attract more difficulties, and interpret neutral events negatively. When you're in a positive mental state, you see more opportunities, attract more cooperation, and interpret ambiguous situations optimistically. Your consciousness literally creates your reality. The Hermetic principle of rhythm teaches that everything moves in cycles: expansion and contraction, action and rest, success and failure. Understanding these natural rhythms prevents you from being thrown off balance by temporary circumstances. When you're going through a difficult period, you know it's temporary and prepare for the upswing. When you're experiencing success, you remain humble and prepare for challenges. This perspective prevents both despair and arrogance. The principle of polarity reveals that apparent opposites are actually different degrees of the same thing. Love and hate, courage and fear, wealth and poverty. These are not absolute states, but positions on a spectrum. This understanding allows you to transform negative states by moving toward their positive poles rather than fighting against them. Instead of trying to eliminate fear, you can cultivate courage. Instead of fighting poverty consciousness, you can develop abundance consciousness. Instead of suppressing anger, you can channel that energy into constructive action. This is the art of mental transmutation that the Hermetic adepts practiced. Breaking the programming. Practical ancient techniques? Now that you understand the philosophical framework, let's get practical. How do you actually begin to break free from the matrix using these ancient wisdom traditions? First, you need to understand that the matrix isn't some external force controlling you from the outside. It's a collection of beliefs, habits, and unconscious patterns that you've internalized over years of social conditioning. The good news is that what was programmed can be reprogrammed. The Stoics developed a practice called the discipline of perception. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius would remind himself that his judgments about events, not the events themselves, determined his experience. You can start this practice immediately. Whenever you find yourself getting upset, angry, or stressed, pause and ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about this situation? Is this story helping me or harming me? What would a wiser perspective look like? Here's a specific example of how this works. Let's say your boss criticizes your work in front of colleagues. The matrix response might be, "This is humiliating. My boss doesn't respect me. I'm probably going to get fired. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent." The Stoic response might be, "My boss is giving me feedback. This is an opportunity to improve my work and demonstrate my professionalism. How I handle this situation will show my character." Notice that the facts haven't changed, only your interpretation of them. But this shift in perspective completely changes your emotional state and your subsequent actions. Instead of becoming defensive or vindictive, you can respond with grace and use the feedback constructively. Buddhist mindfulness meditation is another incredibly powerful tool. You don't need to sit in a cave for years. Even 10 minutes of daily observation of your breath and thoughts will begin to create space between you and your automatic reactions. This space is where freedom lives. Here's a simple mindfulness practice you can start today. Set a timer for 10 minutes. Sit comfortably and focus on your breath. When thoughts arise, simply notice them without judgment and gently return your attention to breathing. Don't try to stop thinking. Just observe the process of thinking without getting caught up in the content of thoughts. This practice gradually develops what Buddhists call bare attention, the ability to observe your mental processes without being controlled by them. Over time, you'll notice thoughts and emotions arising, but you won't be compulsively driven to act on them. This is the beginning of true freedom. The Taoist practice of Wu Wei can be integrated into daily life by asking yourself before major decisions. Am I forcing this? Or am I flowing with natural timing? Am I pushing against reality? Or am I finding the path of least resistance that still honors my values? For example, if you're trying to have a difficult conversation with someone who's clearly not in the mood to listen, Wu Wei might suggest waiting for a better moment rather than forcing the issue. If you're looking for a new job, Wu Wei might mean following up on opportunities that feel aligned rather than desperately applying to every opening. From the Hermetic tradition, Practice the art of self-observation without judgment. Throughout the day, notice which subpersonality is driving your behavior. Are you acting from fear, love, anger, ambition, or something else? This awareness alone begins to give you choice in how you respond to life. Create a daily practice of internal inventory. Each evening, spend a few minutes reviewing your day. What thoughts and emotions dominated your experience? Which subpersonalities were active? What patterns do you notice? How did your internal state influence your external experiences? This isn't about self-criticism or trying to be perfect. It's about developing the skill of conscious self-awareness that allows you to make more intentional choices. The economic matrix, ancient wisdom on wealth and work. One of the most insidious aspects of the modern matrix is how it programs us to think about money and work. We're told that our value as human beings is determined by our net worth, that happiness comes from accumulating more stuff, and that we need to sacrifice our present moment for some hypothetical future security. The ancient philosophers had a radically different relationship with wealth. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, wrote extensively about the proper relationship with money. His key insight: money is a tool, not a goal. The moment you make money your master instead of your servant, you become trapped. Seneca practiced what he called poverty training, voluntarily living as if he had nothing for certain periods of time. This wasn't masochism, it was preparation. By regularly experiencing voluntary discomfort, he became free from the fear of losing his wealth. And paradoxically, this freedom from fear made him more effective at creating and managing wealth. Here's why this works. When you're afraid of losing money, you make decisions from fear rather than wisdom. You might stay in a job you hate because you're afraid you won't find anything better. You might avoid taking calculated risks that could improve your situation. You might hoard money instead of investing it wisely. Fear-based financial decisions usually lead to the very outcomes you're trying to avoid. But when you know you can be happy with less, you can make financial decisions from a place of strength. You can negotiate better terms because you're willing to walk away from bad deals. You can take strategic risks because you're not afraid of temporary setbacks. You can be generous because you don't operate from a scarcity mindset. The Buddhist concept of right livelihood teaches that how you make money matters as much as how much you make. If your work causes harm to others or requires you to compromise your integrity, the financial rewards come with hidden costs to your peace of mind and spiritual development. This doesn't mean you have to become a monk or social worker. It means being conscious about the impact of your work and finding ways to align your livelihood with your values. Maybe it's choosing to work for companies whose mission you believe in. Maybe it's finding ways to serve others through your existing skills. Maybe it's gradually transitioning to work that feels more meaningful. The key is to see your work as service rather than just personal advancement. When you approach your career as an opportunity to contribute value to others, work becomes more fulfilling and you naturally become more successful. Lao Tzu offered perhaps the most radical perspective. He who knows he has enough is rich. In a culture of artificial scarcity and manufactured desire, this ancient wisdom is revolutionary. When you truly understand what enough looks like for you personally, you escape the hamster wheel of endless accumulation. This doesn't mean becoming complacent or losing ambition. It means distinguishing between healthy goals and neurotic compulsions. Healthy financial goals come from a desire to create value, provide for your family, or contribute to causes you care about. Neurotic financial compulsions come from trying to fill an inner void with external possessions or prove your worth through net worth. The Hermetic principle suggests that your external financial situation reflects your internal beliefs about abundance and worth. If you believe the world is a place of scarcity where you have to compete for limited resources, you'll create experiences that confirm this belief. If you believe in abundance and your own inherent worthiness, you'll find opportunities that others miss. Here's a practical exercise. Examine your beliefs about money. Do you believe that money is the root of all evil? Or that wealthy people are necessarily greedy? Do you believe that there's only so much prosperity to go around, or that value creation can benefit everyone? Do you believe you deserve financial success, or do you have hidden guilt about wanting more? These unconscious beliefs shape your financial reality more than your conscious strategies. A person who unconsciously believes they don't deserve wealth will sabotage their own success, even if they consciously want to be rich. A person who believes money is evil will unconsciously avoid opportunities to create it. The ancient approach to wealth is to see it as energy that can be used for good or ill, depending on the consciousness of the person wielding it. Money itself is neutral. It amplifies whatever qualities you already have. If you're generous, money makes you more generous. If you're fearful, money makes you more fearful. This is why inner work is essential before outer success. If you develop qualities like wisdom, compassion, integrity, and courage, financial success becomes a natural expression of these qualities rather than a compensation for their absence. Relationships and the matrix of social conditioning. Perhaps nowhere is matrix programming more evident than in how we approach relationships. From childhood, we're taught to seek external validation, to define ourselves through others' opinions, and to believe that the right person will complete us. The ancient Greeks distinguished between different types of love: eros, philia, storge, and agape. Modern culture tends to focus almost exclusively on eros, the passionate, possessive, often unstable form of love, while neglecting the deeper, more sustainable forms. Eros is intoxicating, but ultimately immature. It's based on projection, fantasy, and need rather than genuine appreciation of another person. When you're in love with someone you barely know, you're actually in love with your projection of who you imagine them to be. This is why so many relationships that start with intense passion end in bitter disappointment. Philia, deep friendship, is based on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine appreciation of another person's character. It develops slowly through shared experiences and demonstrated trustworthiness. While eros can ignite quickly, philia provides the foundation for lasting partnership. Agape, unconditional love, is the recognition that all beings are worthy of care and respect simply because they exist. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or failing to set boundaries, but rather maintaining goodwill, even toward those who've hurt you. Agape is not an emotion, but a choice. The choice to see the humanity in others, even when they're not acting human. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living, and this applies especially to relationships. Most people enter relationships unconsciously, driven by biological programming and social expectations rather than conscious choice. They project their unmet needs onto their partners, and then feel disappointed when these projections aren't fulfilled. Here's what unconscious relationship programming looks like. You meet someone attractive and immediately start fantasizing about your future together. You interpret their behavior in the most positive light possible while ignoring red flags. You try to be whoever you think they want you to be rather than authentically yourself. You expect them to make you happy rather than taking responsibility for your own emotional well-being. The ancient approach to relationships is to know yourself first. The oracle at Delphi's famous inscription, "Know thyself," wasn't just philosophical advice. It was practical guidance for living. When you understand your own patterns, triggers, needs, and projections, you can enter relationships consciously rather than unconsciously. The Stoic approach to relationships is based on the recognition that you cannot control another person's thoughts, feelings, or actions. You can only control your own. This doesn't mean being cold or detached. It means loving without attachment to specific outcomes. When you love someone for who they are, rather than for what they can do for you, the relationship becomes a source of freedom rather than bondage. Marcus Aurelius wrote about his wife with deep appreciation, but he never expected her to be perfect or to fulfill all his needs. He saw his role as loving her well, regardless of how she chose to respond. This approach eliminates most relationship drama because you're not constantly trying to control outcomes. Buddhist psychology offers the concept of loving kindness, the practice of extending genuine care and goodwill to all beings, starting with yourself. Most people are looking for someone to love them because they don't know how to love themselves. But when you develop a genuine, compassionate relationship with yourself, your relationships with others transform automatically. Self-love isn't narcissism or selfishness. It's the recognition that you're a human being worthy of care and respect, including from yourself. When you treat yourself with kindness, you naturally extend that kindness to others. When you're harsh and critical with yourself, you tend to be harsh and critical with others. The Hermetic principle, as within, so without, reveals that the quality of your relationships reflects your relationship with yourself. If you're highly critical of yourself, you'll either attract people who are critical of you, or you'll be overly critical of others. If you don't trust yourself, you'll have difficulty trusting others. The work of improving your relationships begins with inner work. Here's a practical relationship exercise from the ancient traditions. Instead of focusing on what you want from others, focus on what you can give. Instead of seeking to be understood, seek to understand. Instead of demanding love, become more loving. This shift from taking to giving transforms every relationship because you're no longer coming from a place of neediness. The ancient understanding of relationship also recognizes that healthy partnerships require two complete individuals choosing to share their lives, not two incomplete halves trying to make a whole. When you expect another person to complete you, you put an impossible burden on the relationship. When you come to relationship as a complete person offering your gifts, you create space for genuine intimacy and mutual growth. This is where ancient wisdom becomes intensely practical. Marcus Aurelius, who held ultimate political power as Roman emperor, chose to use his position to serve others rather than exploit them. His private journal, Meditations, reveals a man constantly questioning his own motives and trying to act with integrity despite the corrupting influence of power. Aurelius wrote, "What brings no benefit to the hive can bring none to the bee." He understood that individual well-being and collective well-being are inseparable. When political systems serve only the elite while exploiting the masses, they ultimately destroy themselves. History is littered with empires that collapsed because their leaders forgot this fundamental truth. The Stoic approach to political engagement is neither passive acceptance nor violent rebellion. It's what we might call engaged detachment, participating in society while maintaining inner freedom. You vote, you speak truth, you serve others, but you don't derive your identity from political outcomes. You do what's right because it's right, not because you expect specific results. Lao Tzu offered perhaps the most radical political philosophy ever written. The best leaders are those who the people hardly know exist. When their work is done, their aim fulfilled, the people will say, "We did it ourselves." This describes leadership as service rather than domination. True leadership creates conditions for others to flourish rather than creating dependency. It empowers rather than controls. It serves the collective good rather than accumulating personal power. When you encounter leaders who constantly need recognition, who create drama and conflict, who promise to solve all your problems if you just give them more power, these are signs of ego-driven leadership that ultimately leads to corruption. The ancient Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven taught that political authority is conditional on moral integrity. When leaders become corrupt, they lose their legitimacy to govern. This isn't just philosophical theory. It's practical wisdom about how societies maintain health and stability. But here's what's crucial to understand. Waiting for perfect leaders is another form of matrix programming. The ancient philosophers taught that political change begins with individual transformation. You cannot create a just society if you haven't first become a just person. You cannot demand integrity from your leaders if you haven't developed integrity in your own life. Gandhi embodied this principle when he said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." He didn't try to overthrow the British Empire through violence or political maneuvering. He became so aligned with truth and nonviolence that his mere presence began to transform everything around him. This is the real secret of political awakening. You change the world by changing yourself. When you stop participating in systems of deception, exploitation, and violence, even in small ways, you withdraw your consent from these systems. When enough people do this, the systems begin to change. Here's what this looks like practically. You stop consuming news that's designed to make you angry and afraid. You support businesses that align with your values rather than just seeking the cheapest prices. You treat everyone you encounter with dignity and respect, regardless of their political beliefs. You speak truth even when it's inconvenient. You take responsibility for your own life, rather than blaming politicians for your problems. The ancient understanding of politics recognizes that outer political systems are reflections of collective inner states. A society of unconscious, fearful, angry people will create political systems based on unconsciousness, fear, and anger. A society of awakened, compassionate, wise people will create political systems based on awakening, compassion, and wisdom. This is why the most radical political act is your own awakening. Every person who breaks free from unconscious programming makes it easier for others to do the same. Every person who chooses love over fear, truth over deception, service over exploitation creates ripples that eventually transform entire societies. The health matrix, ancient wisdom for physical and mental well-being. The modern medical system is another aspect of the matrix that keeps people dependent and disempowered. We're taught to outsource responsibility for our health to experts, to treat symptoms rather than addressing root causes, and to believe that aging and disease are inevitable rather than largely preventable. The ancient traditions understood that physical health, mental health, and spiritual development are inseparable. Mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body, wasn't just a Latin phrase, but a recognition that consciousness and physical form are intimately connected. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, taught that food is medicine and medicine is food. He understood that most diseases arise from lifestyle choices rather than random genetic bad luck. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food, remains one of the most revolutionary statements ever made about health. But the food industry has systematically corrupted our relationship with nutrition. We're surrounded by substances that technically qualify as food, but have been stripped of their life force through processing. We eat for convenience and taste rather than nourishment, and wonder why we feel tired, sick, and mentally foggy. The ancient approach to eating was simple. Consume foods that come from the earth in their natural state. Eat when hungry. Stop when satisfied. Pay attention to how different foods affect your energy, mood, and mental clarity. Use food as fuel for consciousness rather than as entertainment or emotional medication. Ayurveda, the traditional healing system of India, taught that different people have different constitutional types and therefore need different approaches to diet and lifestyle. What makes one person feel energized might make another person feel sluggish. The key is developing sensitivity to your own body's signals rather than following generic dietary advice. Here's a simple practice from Ayurveda. Before eating, pause and ask your body what it actually needs. Not what you're craving because of stress or boredom, but what would truly nourish you right now. Then eat slowly, paying attention to flavors, textures, and how the food makes you feel. This mindful approach to eating naturally leads to better food choices and improved digestion. Traditional Chinese medicine understood that physical symptoms are often manifestations of energetic imbalances. Instead of just treating the symptom, they looked for the underlying pattern of disharmony. Pain wasn't just something to suppress with medication. It was information about where energy was blocked or misdirected. This holistic approach to health requires taking responsibility for your own well-being rather than passively receiving treatments. It means paying attention to the early warning signs of imbalance rather than waiting until you're seriously ill. It means understanding that your thoughts, emotions, relationships, and lifestyle choices all affect your physical health. The Stoics practiced what they called discipline of the body, not as vanity or obsession, but as a form of spiritual practice. They understood that a healthy body supports a clear mind, and a clear mind makes better decisions about how to care for the body. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being." He saw physical self-care not as optional luxury, but as essential preparation for serving others. This doesn't mean becoming obsessive about diet and exercise. It means treating your body as the sacred vessel that carries your consciousness through this lifetime. When you approach physical health from this perspective, taking care of yourself becomes an act of reverence rather than vanity. The ancient traditions also understood the importance of stress management for physical health. Long before modern science proved that chronic stress causes inflammation, disease, and premature aging, philosophers were developing practices for maintaining inner peace regardless of external circumstances. Meditation isn't just spiritual practice, it's preventive medicine. Regular meditation has been shown to lower blood pressure, improve immune function, reduce inflammation, and increase longevity. But the ancients didn't meditate just for physical benefits. They meditated to maintain clarity and compassion in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Sleep was considered sacred in many ancient traditions. It wasn't just physical rest, but a time when consciousness travels to other realms and the body repairs itself. Modern culture treats sleep as an inconvenience, something to minimize so we can be more productive. But chronic sleep deprivation is perhaps the most widespread form of self-abuse in our society. Here's what the ancients knew that we've forgotten. Rest is not laziness. Sleep is not weakness. Taking time for reflection and contemplation is not self-indulgence. These practices are essential for maintaining the clarity and energy needed to live consciously. Movement was also understood as spiritual practice. Yoga literally means union, the integration of body, mind, and spirit through conscious movement. Martial arts developed as ways to cultivate both physical skill and mental discipline. Even simple walking was considered a form of meditation. The key is to find forms of movement that feel nourishing rather than punishing. Exercise should energize you, not exhaust you. It should connect you more deeply with your body, not create a sense of struggle or resistance. When movement becomes a celebration of what your body can do, rather than punishment for what you've eaten, it transforms from obligation into joy. The technology matrix, ancient wisdom in a digital age. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the modern matrix is how technology has been designed to capture and monetize human attention. We carry devices that are literally engineered to be addictive, using the same psychological principles that casinos use to keep gamblers playing. Social media platforms hire teams of neuroscientists and behavioral economists to make their products as compelling as possible. Every notification, every like, every share triggers a small hit of dopamine that keeps you coming back for more. You think you're using technology, but technology is using you. The ancient Stoics understood something profound about attention. It's your most valuable resource. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." He knew that consciousness scattered across past regrets and future anxieties cannot respond wisely to current circumstances. Modern technology fragments attention in ways the ancients could never have imagined. We check our phones hundreds of times per day, constantly switching between different apps and platforms. Our minds are trained to expect constant stimulation, making it difficult to focus deeply on anything. The Buddhist concept of mindfulness offers a powerful antidote to technological distraction. Mindfulness isn't just about meditation. It's about bringing conscious awareness to whatever you're doing. When you eat, just eat. When you walk, just walk. When you're having a conversation, be fully present with the person in front of you. Here's a simple practice for breaking free from technological addiction. Before picking up your phone or opening social media, pause and ask yourself, what am I looking for right now? Am I bored, anxious, lonely, or genuinely seeking specific information? Most of the time, you'll realize you're reaching for your device as a way to avoid being present with yourself. The ancient Greeks distinguished between different types of time, chronos and kairos. Chronos is quantitative, minutes, hours, days. Kairos is qualitative, the perfect moment for action, the timeless experience of being fully present. Technology operates entirely in chronos, constantly dividing your attention into smaller and smaller fragments. But all meaningful experiences happen in kairos. The moment of creative inspiration, the deep conversation with a friend, the experience of natural beauty, the recognition of truth. When you're constantly checking devices and consuming information, you miss these kairos moments entirely. You're so focused on documenting your experience that you forget to actually have the experience. You're so busy staying connected to distant networks that you lose connection with immediate reality. The Taoist principle of Wu Wei suggests that there are natural rhythms to engagement and withdrawal, activity and rest, connection and solitude. Technology disrupts these natural rhythms by making everything available all the time. You can work at any hour, communicate with anyone instantly, access unlimited entertainment and information. This constant availability creates a subtle but persistent anxiety. There's always something else you could be doing, someone else you could be talking to, some piece of information you could be consuming. The ancient practice of contentment, being satisfied with what is, becomes nearly impossible when you're constantly exposed to infinite alternatives. The Hermetic principle, as above, so below, reveals that our external technological environment reflects our internal mental patterns. If your inner world is chaotic, fragmented, and constantly seeking stimulation, you'll create an external environment that mirrors these qualities. If your inner world is peaceful, focused, and content, you'll naturally create more harmonious external conditions. This is why the solution to technological overwhelm isn't just better time management or digital detox programs. It's developing inner stability that allows you to use technology consciously rather than being used by it. Here are some practical applications of ancient wisdom to modern technology. Create sacred spaces and times that are completely free from devices. The ancients understood the importance of temples, spaces dedicated to contemplation and reverence. Your bedroom, your dining table, your morning routine can become modern temples if you keep them free from technological intrusion. Practice the Stoic discipline of perception with information consumption. Before reading news, watching videos, or scrolling social media, ask yourself, will this information help me become a better person or serve others more effectively? Or am I consuming this content to avoid being present with myself? Use technology to support rather than replace human connection. The ancient philosophers valued deep friendship and meaningful conversation as essential to the good life. Video calls with distant friends can be meaningful if you're fully present. Social media can be valuable if you use it to organize real-world gatherings or support people going through difficult times. Remember that your ancestors lived rich, meaningful lives without constant connectivity. The deepest sources of fulfillment, love, creativity, service, contemplation, connection with nature don't require technology at all. Use digital tools to enhance these essential human experiences, not to replace them. One of the most beautiful aspects of breaking free from the matrix is rediscovering your natural creativity. We're all born creative, but most educational and economic systems systematically train us to suppress creative expression in favor of conformity and productivity. The ancient Greeks understood that creativity was not just personal expression, but a way of connecting with divine inspiration. They spoke of the muses, goddesses who would whisper ideas to artists, poets, and musicians. This wasn't primitive superstition, but recognition that true creativity comes from beyond the personal ego. When you're creating from ego, trying to impress others, seeking validation, or copying what's already popular, the work feels forced and ultimately unsatisfying. But when you create from inspiration, allowing something greater than yourself to flow through you, the process becomes effortless and joyful. Plato had a complicated relationship with artists because he understood their power. He knew that art could either elevate consciousness or reinforce illusions. Contemporary media largely reinforces matrix programming, promoting consumption, superficiality, and unconsciousness. But true art has the power to awaken people to deeper truths. The Renaissance masters understood that artistic creation was spiritual practice. They would pray before beginning work, asking for guidance and wisdom. They saw themselves not as the creators, but as channels for divine creativity. This humility allowed them to produce works that continue to inspire people centuries later. Here's what this means practically. Instead of asking, "What can I create that will make me famous, rich, popular?" ask, "What wants to be created through me? What does the world need that I'm uniquely positioned to offer?" This shift from ego-driven to service-oriented creativity transforms both the process and the results. The Taoist understanding of creativity emphasizes naturalness and spontaneity. Zhuangzi wrote about a master butcher who could carve an entire ox without belling his knife because he followed the natural structure of the animal. True creativity works with natural patterns rather than forcing artificial ones. This means paying attention to your natural rhythms and inclinations rather than trying to force creativity on a schedule. Some people are most creative in the early morning, others late at night. Some need complete silence, others work better with music. Honor your natural creative patterns instead of fighting against them. The Buddhist concept of beginner's mind is essential for authentic creativity. Beginners are naturally curious, experimental, and unattached to outcomes. They're not constrained by rules about what's possible or proper. As you develop expertise, it's easy to become rigid and predictable. Maintaining beginner's mind keeps your creativity fresh and alive. Every ancient tradition understood that creativity requires both inspiration and discipline. The inspiration comes from connecting with something beyond yourself through meditation, time in nature, study of great works, or simply paying attention to life with wonder and curiosity. The discipline comes from showing up regularly to practice your craft, even when you don't feel inspired. Modern culture often portrays creativity as pure inspiration, the artist struck by lightning, the writer visited by the muse. But the ancients knew that inspiration comes to prepared minds. You have to do the work of developing your skills, studying your craft, and creating space in your life for creative expression. The Hermetic principle suggests that your creative work reflects your level of consciousness. If you're creating from fear, anger, or ego, the work will carry those energies. If you're creating from love, wisdom, or service, the work will inspire and uplift others. This is why inner work is essential for authentic creativity. As you develop greater self-awareness, emotional maturity, and spiritual understanding, your creative expression naturally becomes more profound and impactful. Here's a practical approach to awaken creativity. Start each creative session with some form of centering practice, meditation, prayer, or simply taking a few conscious breaths. Ask for guidance and wisdom. Then begin creating without attachment to specific outcomes. Let the work unfold naturally, trusting that whatever emerges is what's meant to be. Don't worry about whether your creative work is good enough or marketable. Focus on authenticity and service. Ask yourself, does this come from my heart? Does it reflect my truth? Could it help or inspire someone else? If you can answer yes to these questions, your creative work is successful, regardless of external recognition. Understanding ancient wisdom intellectually is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you integrate these teachings into daily life. This isn't about becoming a monk or retreating from the world. It's about bringing ancient wisdom into modern circumstances. Start your day with intention rather than reaction. Instead of immediately checking your phone upon waking, spend a few minutes setting your intention for the day. What kind of person do you want to be today? How do you want to serve others? What qualities do you want to embody? Throughout the day, practice the Stoic discipline of perception. When challenging situations arise, pause and ask yourself, what can I control in this situation? How can I respond with wisdom rather than reactivity? What would my highest self do in this moment? Cultivate the Buddhist practice of mindfulness by bringing full attention to whatever you're doing. When you're eating, taste your food. When you're walking, feel your feet on the ground. When you're talking with someone, listen deeply rather than planning what you'll say next. Apply Taoist principles by looking for the natural flow in situations rather than forcing outcomes. When you encounter resistance, ask yourself, am I pushing against reality? Is there a more natural way to achieve my goals? What would Wu Wei look like in this situation? Use Hermetic insights to observe the connection between your inner state and outer experiences. Notice how your mood affects your perception of events. Pay attention to which subpersonalities are active and how they influence your behavior. Create daily practices that connect you with wisdom traditions. This might be morning meditation, evening reflection, reading philosophical texts, spending time in nature, or engaging in creative expression. The key is consistency rather than intensity. Small daily practices create more transformation than occasional dramatic efforts. Develop what the ancients called philosophical friendship, relationships with others who are also committed to growth and awakening. Share insights, support each other through challenges, and hold each other accountable to your highest aspirations. Remember that awakening is not a destination, but a continuous process. You'll have days when you feel completely free from matrix programming, and other days when you feel completely caught in it. This oscillation is natural and part of the journey. The key is maintaining commitment to consciousness, regardless of temporary circumstances. The ancient philosophers understood that individual awakening and collective transformation are inseparable. As you free yourself from unconscious patterns, you make it easier for others to do the same. Your commitment to truth, compassion, and wisdom creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. This is the real promise of ancient wisdom, not just personal liberation, but the possibility of contributing to the awakening of human consciousness itself. In a world that often seems dominated by fear, division, and unconsciousness, your commitment to wisdom becomes a beacon of hope for others. The Matrix isn't some science fiction concept. It's the collection of unconscious patterns, limiting beliefs, and social conditioning that keeps most people trapped in lives of quiet desperation. But as we've seen, the ancient philosophers mapped out the precise path to freedom over 2,000 years ago. Whether you follow Plato's journey from the cave of shadows to the light of truth, embrace the Stoic discipline of focusing on what you can control, cultivate the Buddhist awareness that sees through the illusion of a separate self, practice the Taoist art of effortless action, or apply Hermetic principles of inner transformation, the destination is the same: genuine freedom and authentic power. The beautiful thing about ancient wisdom is that it's been tested by millions of people across thousands of years. Unlike modern self-help fads that come and go, these teachings have helped people find meaning, purpose, and liberation in every historical period and cultural context. But here's what you need to understand. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. You can watch 100 videos about ancient wisdom and still remain trapped if you don't actually practice what you've learned. The philosophers didn't just think about these ideas, they lived them, often at great personal cost. Your awakening matters more than you realize. Every person who breaks free from unconscious programming makes it easier for others to follow. Every individual who chooses wisdom over ignorance, love over fear, truth over comfort, creates ripples that eventually transform entire societies. The ancient wisdom isn't ancient because it's old. It's ancient because it's eternal. These truths were as relevant in Marcus Aurelius's time as they are today, and they'll be just as relevant 1,000 years from now. Human nature doesn't change, but humans can evolve. The choice is yours. Remain in the comfortable prison of unconscious living, or step into the sometimes uncomfortable freedom of awakened existence. The ancient masters can show you the way, but they can't walk the path for you. What will you choose?